Well, I am just so delighted that you're both here. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, and I know that everybody who is watching here with us will find this a very, very special moment indeed. And thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Very happy
No,
to be here.
Very happy to listen to my son talk.
Yes,
Yeah, I
I do
know.
most of the
I
talking
know,
today.
that's fine, Irv. Ben can do all the talking. It's quite all right.
well, and we've got some time, haven't we? Because we want to take some time over your latest book,
Yeah,
Irvin,
we
and
start
Ben, that
with
you were
that.
co-author on the book. And so I think, Ben, you're going to say some things about the book and maybe
Yeah,
reflect on the process and have some reading time as well over
sure,
these next half.
sure, I will do. Dad, I'm going to just say a little bit about um, where you are, where I am, and if you have want to add anything, please do. Unfortunately, we don't live in the same place these days. I'm in Southern California, and my father's in Northern California. And I was listening to the previous folks talk and had some that stirred some things in me. Um, I guess just for context, my father's 93 now, and he is has spent a lifetime. I've watched him for my lifetime do two things: work with people, talk with people one on one, and in very small groups,
Mm.
which I think has always been your comfort zone. That if you would you think that's true? That the intimate conversation is really your specialty. But I've also watched, since I was a child, my father go out and do these large workshop presentations
Yes.
in front of hundreds or thousands sometimes of people. But those have always been very anxiety producing and somewhat stressful. You've done them very well, but it was not your favorite thing to do. You think that's right? Yeah.
So I was used to it for a while. I mean, I was speaking to large groups for a very long time.
Mm.
Now I dare talk to a group because I forget everything. My mind is slowly just disintegrating. It's highly disturbing to observe that.
Mm.
Um, but
So I
I
guess
still,
what I
but what else do though? What right? I mean, I'm even thinking about maybe about a book about the disappearing mind of the 93, 94 year old man. So I still enjoy the idea of writing. It's hard for me to read though, so I never exactly knew. Well, first of all, I don't know anyone my age, and secondly, all my friends are dead, so I'm very all my close friends are dead. And it's very very awkward for me to still be alive. Um, so
It's
I'm
painful.
yeah.
yes.
Well, I for one am still glad you're still alive. Um,
So
uh,
are we. We are all
We
very
are
pleased
indeed.
you're still
Yes,
alive.
we are indeed.
but I know
Thank
it's
you for staying alive for us.
but I know it's been challenging. So I guess what I want to tell everybody on the Zoom here is that while I can attempt to represent my father, I certainly am not in any way attempting to fill his shoes. In fact, I've spent much of my life avoiding attempting to fill his shoes. But now I've come around to at least collaborating with him. But I do want you to know that when when you are one on one with my father right now, he's still very much present and alive. Although sometimes thoughts slip away and then they tend to come back.
Mm.
But I didn't want him to be in the position of needing to hold the room for 243 people as we now have online. So I'm gonna take that over for a bit. Um, I have a few thoughts to offer, and then I'm going to read a chapter from the book we've written together, Hour of the Heart. And I'm also going to beg your forgiveness, everyone. My father may want to turn off his camera for a while he's listening and then come
Sure.
back in later, Dad. I don't want you to feel like you have to be on the spot for the next half an hour. So whenever you'd like to do that, you can feel free.
Yep.
And I guess I'll give just another thought or two that I think was really inspired by what Lillian was saying about Paul. The notion that Paul was searching for the human spirit in the spiritual is wonderful and compelling. And I know that for my father, again, Dad, you can feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm overreaching here, but my father didn't have a religious life, and the story I'll read talks to that a little bit. But I do think that there was very much a search for many decades in my father's life about what was shared meaning that we as humans have. And that was a search internally in many ways, and a search through the philosophy of the great thinkers of our traditions, both Eastern and Western. But through philosophy, through communion with his patients, there was always a search that maybe we wouldn't call spiritual, or maybe that he wouldn't call spiritual, but I think the quest for meaning is certainly a shared territory, perhaps, between spiritual and religious work and philosophical work. And while those meanings may on one level look a little different, while that search may look a little different, I think ultimately there's great similarity in the desire to understand what we as humans are doing here on the world and how we might live our lives in ways that reach value and offer meaning for ourselves and those around us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if this is a good time, I might read a chapter from the...
Yes. Can I draw your attention to the fact that in the chat, there are many people making many moving comments about what your work, Irv, has meant to them over the years, and how it has changed their lives, and how emotional they feel about being able to honor you today.
And you might ask
we could read some of those in a bit.
Yeah, that would be nice.
It's always get those letters. Sometimes I get overwhelmed by the too many, but I'm always touched by it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I believe Joe, your trusted assistant, is there with you. Hello, Joe.
Oh, hello, Joe.
Hello.
Don't be shy. Show yourself.
Come and say hello if you want to.
Yes.
And then I think
Joe,
as we're
Joe
going
makes
into
everything work.
Oh,
but
wonderful,
you can open up that chat window if you want.
Yeah.
So let me read a chapter from the current book. And just for context, the book, Hour of the Heart, this is the American cover. I have a copy of the British cover somewhere behind me, and other languages are coming out this year. If you want to look at my Facebook page, which is Ben Yalom Creative Therapy, I will be posting the dates for when the various translations into different languages will be coming and giving you updates. So I can put that in the chat.
Yes, please, Ben.
Yalom
And you're also coming to online events to do some work around the book as well. So we'll put that link in the chat too. It'd be lovely to have everybody back to talk some more.
That would be great. I'll be speaking with John about really in depth about the process that my father and I did collaborating on this book, and some of what I've learned as a result of having that wonderful collaboration.
Maybe as you're Ben going into the reading, we'll give you center stage on the spotlight, and then that will give Irv and Emmy and I a moment, and then let you do the reading. That's all right.
Have a little break. Why not?
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
So the book is Hour of the Heart, and for those of you who don't know about it, what's happened is that my father, as he was reaching, I misspelled creative. Pardon me in the chat. I appear to be from Crete, Ben Yalom Crete Therapy. Very nice. In any case, as my father reached his late 80s, he found that his memory was starting to slip and thought that doing ongoing long-term therapy was no longer possible for him to give his clients or his patients the care and care that they needed and that was appropriate, because sometimes he couldn't remember from one session to the next or over a long period of time. And then that went on for a few years, and then he reached another juncture where it was clear that his memory was really failing, and that he no longer felt it would be responsible to see clients in ongoing therapy. And he came up with an interesting idea, which was this question of what would it be to see people for 1 hour consultations, 1 hour only, not with the goal of curing people, as there's no sense that therapy should only take 1 hour. We know it's a long and ongoing process as people change. Maybe every once in a while there's a significant insight where change happens swiftly, but by and large, that's not the case. And so my father decided he was going to do a series of 1 hour consultations in order, I think this served a dual purpose. One was that he felt that he could still be helpful, having 6 decades of experience and experimentation to work with. And it was a very interesting question to him to say, well, what can I do that is helpful in an hour? And often these would provide some insight as to what is really the core problem that a patient is dealing with, followed often by a referral to a particular therapist suggesting longer term work on this particular topic. I think there's also a case to be made that my father also wanted to continue to feel engaged personally and continue to be a teacher and a helper in the world. And having these 1 hour sessions provided something for him that was very important as well. And the book speaks about both of these things, what's happening for him internally as he's seeing clients and patients, as he's aging, looking at his own brain, as he mentioned, and the changes that were happening there. And it also speaks about a number of the stories that came up. As my father has been wont to do for decades, is to look at what is happening clinically with his patients. And every once in a while, there's something where there's a story that is both a very human story, but also one that seems to have teaching capacity, that seems to be able to help people who may be other therapists in training, people looking for new approaches, all of those things. So for the course of a couple of years, as my father was seeing patients for one individual, occasionally 2 sessions, he wrote stories about the most compelling of those. And after a couple of years, as his memory was continuing to deteriorate, and as he began to feel like perhaps he shouldn't continue doing this for too long, but he also had written a great deal of some very interesting stories about them. He and I sat down and we looked at the manuscript together, the collection of stories, and I started to do some work on let's shape this into a book, because it was really quite, the pieces were quite granular at that point. And together we formed it into we picked the best stories. We tried to provide some theoretical threads so he could speak about what he was doing therapeutically, and these stories could come to life in a context that could be helpful as teaching instruments. I'm going to take a quick sip of tea here. So what we have are a book of stories about very short encounters, and often with my father's thoughts about what's going on internally in terms of the therapy and the therapeutic encounter, and then also what's coming up for him in his aging, in his thinking about that that encounter is inspiring. I'm going to read these stories. Many of these stories are about engaging in the here and now moment of therapy and the practices around that. The book is not specifically focused on existential issues, but of course, my father having an existential lens through which he views the world and views therapy, those topics come up quite a bit. In this particular story, they come up perhaps a little bit more overtly, a little more explicitly, so I thought it would be a good one to read for this audience. And the only thing for context for the story is that this story takes place probably about 6 months after my mother had died. My mother died in November of 2019, and my father and my mother were bonded together from the time that they were in middle school. So both a wonderful marriage and a quite stable place to grow up in for myself, but at this point, quite an enormous loss for my father, in the sense that truly prior to this moment, these moments here, he hadn't been alone as an adult, hadn't been an individual as an adult in a way. And so that comes up in the story. So this is context. So the story is called Albert's Anxiety. Albert, a physicist in South Africa, contacted me requesting a consultation. A few hours before our meeting, I received this email. Dr. Yalom, the most essential point I want to discuss is my fear of death. Since I was a child of 8 or 9 years, the knowledge of the finiteness of my existence has hit me like a lightning bolt. It has been part of my life since then, every day, every night, more and more since the last year when I turned 70. Now, it makes sense that people like Albert seek me out. I'm speaking for my father here. If that doesn't make sense, this is his voice. We worked on this together, but we chose his voice that you all know to try and tell these stories.
Absolutely, absolutely. You can do it in your own voice, though, Ben. Yeah.
I will. I won't attempt an accent or anything that's not.
No.
It makes sense that people like Albert seek me out, not only because of my long work on existential concerns, but also because our American culture does such a poor job of dealing with death. We hide it away, replacing it with euphemism, passing away, going to a better place, or, as I recently heard my grandson Adrian say, becoming unalived. And with stories of eternal life that we encounter from folklore and religion alike. Of course, the idea of death can certainly be terrifying, but I have no idea that we exacerbate these fears by collectively burying our heads in the sand. Dying, the one thing that every single one of us will experience, should feature prominently in the way we understand living. I believe that anxiety about death is central to many of the concerns people come to therapy for. Most often, this existential fear is buried in the subconscious and manifests in other ways, often reluctance to engage fully in life. For if one has never really lived, one has no real life to lose. Or, conversely, efforts to thumb one's nose at mortality through death-defying feats like skydiving, or constantly seeking the excitement of sexual union. I've often encountered these death anxiety-related tendencies in my patients, and have helped many of them manage these fears without being overcome by them. While this was familiar territory, I was unsure how much I would have to offer Albert in one session. Serious existential work takes time, as fears of death are deeply rooted and intertwined with our ways of living. At the very least, I thought I could offer some perspectives that had been helpful to other patients and perhaps share some of my own recent experiences of staring death straight in the eye. As Albert and I faced each other over Zoom, I saw a thoughtful, energetic, white-haired man. "Professor Yalom," he began, "I am delighted to meet you. I am a professor of physics, and please allow me to say something I have not said to anyone for decades. I've long been a student of your work, and I am thrilled at this opportunity to meet you face to face. This stopped me for a moment. I'd never met a physicist who was familiar with my work. Shall we be informal and use first names, I said, you Albert and me Irv? How about Professor and Professor, he said. Just kidding. By all means, first names. I prefer it. It might be a bit awkward for me at first. You've been my teacher for years, and I've read many of your books and followed you on Facebook. Or at least I try to. You rarely post. True, I did for a while, I said, but I found it consumed too much time. Today, however, we have an entire hour together, so let's plunge right in. You mentioned death anxiety in your email. Can you describe your experience? Well, to be honest, this is a first-time occasion. I've never shared this with anyone, not even my wife. I'm not sure how to start. Well, let me help, I said. Do you remember when you first experienced death anxiety? Oh, I didn't anticipate that question. Let me think. After closing his eyes and concentrating for a minute, Albert finally said, one very strong memory surfaces. When I was about 8, I went to my grandfather's funeral, and I remember seeing my father weeping. I tugged on his arm and asked, Papa, what happens after you die? I guess my father wanted to comfort me and maybe himself, so he said, when you die, you go into a dream state in which you continue to live your life over and over throughout eternity. I now know that my father was trying to help, but when I was 8, it had the opposite effect. It made me feel worse. I was confused by his answer, and I asked myself and my father over and over, but how do I know whether my life right now is real or just this dream state? That thought, that our lives might simply be a dream, has haunted me my whole life. Such irony. What was meant to console me ended up creating so much more anxiety. Eventually, my father grew annoyed with my questions, Albert continued. He urged me to simply accept the church's view of death and the afterlife, and I tried for years to believe in the church's teachings, Albert went on. But as I matured and developed a scientist's mind, I concluded that the religious view of afterlife was not supported by any evidence. So long ago, in my early 20s, I left the church for good, and I've never looked back. He paused, uttered a few more words, and found he didn't have much more to say. After a bit, it was clear that he was having great difficulty recalling any more about the development of his death anxiety. Given the time pressure, I pushed forward. Albert, perhaps it would be helpful to you if I talked about my own experiences with death anxiety. He looked startled. I'd be most interested. That will probably help my own recall. Well, as you may know, I said, my wife died almost exactly a year ago. It was off a little bit. Yes, I read the news of your loss, he said. I'm sorry I did not offer you my condolences. I was unsure of the proper thing to say. In fact, let me be honest. I have a problem speaking to you today. I worry that saying the wrong thing about death, or my fear of it, might cause you pain. On the contrary, I said, I prefer you being straightforward. I find that facing mortality and discussing it openly with others helps me. I've been reflecting a great deal on my own death anxiety, and it's good to be able to share what I'm learning. Oh, what have you learned? I'm eager to know. What had I learned? Death has been front and center in my mind ever since Marilyn had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma. During her last few weeks of life, she and I had endless talks about death. I'd even reread much of what I had written about death and our fears of dying in the past. What had helped? Well, first, I said, I'm learning that writing about death and dying is very different from actually experiencing it. To be honest, some of the things I've long thought are useful defenses against death anxiety haven't helped me a lot, but others really have. Most important is this. As Marilyn's illness progressed, we agreed over and over again that we had few regrets about how we had lived our lives. In fact, even now, I can almost hear her saying, the death of an 87-year-old woman who lived her life fully, who had 4 wonderful children and a loving husband always by her side, is not a tragedy. This has really solidified a formula regarding the relationship between how one lives and how one views death. It goes like this. The fewer regrets about how one has lived, the less death anxiety one experiences. This is not a new thought. In fact, it's one I've often offered patients, but it has certainly acquired a new relevance for me as my relationship with death has become more intimate. I believe this formula has some power. I wonder, might it have resonance for you, Albert? Albert closed his eyes in deep concentration for a short time. Then he shook his head. I'm not certain that formula works for me, Irv. I've had a good life and few regrets. I've enjoyed my work. I've been creative. I've trained many good students. I've been in love with my wife for nearly 50 years. And I have a wonderful daughter who lives only a couple of kilometers away. Nevertheless, I continue to be haunted by death anxiety, especially the last 10 years. Again and again, I've sought help from knowledgeable friends, colleagues, and priests, but always in vain. Honestly, I envy those who are comforted by their religious beliefs, but I just can't believe something I know to be false. Your envy of religious believers resonates with me, Albert. Let me tell you about an experience I had recently. I awoke one morning with only a few remnants of a dream about my wife, and I ached with grief, missing her more than ever. And then, from out of nowhere, the thought occurred to me that when I died, I would be buried next to her, and thus would be joining Marilyn. Now, of course, to a rational scientific mind, the idea of joining Marilyn is absurd. Marilyn is dead. She no longer exists, and when I die, I will no longer exist. Like you, I've long rejected any religious beliefs of an afterlife. And yet, when I thought about joining Marilyn, anxiety flowed out of me, and comfort flowed in, seeping through my body. Strange, isn't it, that I can somehow know one thing in my rational mind and simultaneously have a powerful emotional response to the opposite idea? Very strange, Albert agreed. Well, we are human and can hold contradictions. This one illuminates for me the remarkable gift that religion offers, I continued. And it makes me appreciate how every major religion has, in one way or another, offered humankind the solace of continued existence. How comforting that would be. Albert nodded. It almost makes me wish I could believe. Almost, I said. May I ask you a personal question? I gather from your writing that you are an atheist, but also that you grew up in a traditional Jewish household. How did you lose or escape religion? Oh, it never made sense to me, I said. But you're right that my childhood world was very Jewish. My parents had fled the old world in the 1920s and ended up in Washington, D.C., with a group of others from the same shtetl, Celts, a speck on the map in the old Russian Empire. But many hadn't made it, siblings, cousins, friends, and had died in the Nazi camps. This shadow hung over our whole community. In any case, my parents spoke Yiddish. Everything I ate was kosher. and I hardly knew anyone who wasn't Jewish. Culturally, it seemed normal. But I couldn't fathom the religion. Was my eating a cheeseburger truly something that would offend God, who is busy taking care of the entire universe? Like you, I have a strong memory of an important encounter with my father. We were having lunch together one day, and I remember asking him if he believed in God. After the Shoah, how can anyone believe in God? He responded. Well, that finally settled it for me. Was all this information helpful for Albert? I don't know. And talking about the Holocaust certainly wasn't likely to ease anyone's anxiety. But he had asked for my history, and I did not see any harm in sharing it. Thank you, Irv, he said after taking all of this in. It's helpful to hear that you have struggled with this too. Albert, let me return to the question I asked a few minutes ago. Please focus as deeply as you can on the formula that the fewer regrets about how one lived, the less death anxiety one experiences. Think, does that have any meaning for you? Albert pondered for a moment. He responded, I've been considering it, but I don't think so. I am haunted by death anxiety, and yet I feel no regrets. Professionally, I've had a career that far exceeded anything I dreamed of doing. I researched and wrote, influenced my field heavily. I received many important prizes. I've had a good life. So my linkage of regrets and death anxiety doesn't resonate for you. Well, that's important for me to know. Albert wore a lovely expression of intense curiosity as he turned the idea over in his head. I watched, enthralled, for a couple of minutes, until it seemed he was stuck. Try this, I said. Just concentrate on the phrase regrets in my life, and then think aloud for a couple of minutes. Simply say whatever comes to your mind. Omit nothing, censor nothing, force nothing. I'll give it a try. Never done this before? Get loose. Don't think. Just speak. Demanding father. He darkened our lives. Much regret at not having had a loving father. He poisoned the whole family. My two brothers were deeply scarred by him. I was the youngest and the least damaged. He died when I was 12, so yes, regrets about my family whenever I see a loving, happy family. He paused. Is this what you mean, Irv? Exactly. Keep going. Once I grew into an adult and left my family home, I've had no real regrets. Quite the opposite. Married 48 years, good marriage, wonderful daughter, always loved my wife. Maybe a few regrets about not playing the field longer, not having sexual adventures before marriage, and regrets about my son. Unable to find himself professionally, unable to find a good mate. He stopped and looked at me. Is this okay? I sort of switched. You're doing great. I know this is not easy, but try to concentrate for just a couple more minutes. Albert nodded and took a deep breath. Regrets. Well, yes, I have to acknowledge many regrets about my wife's health. She was so often sick, we couldn't travel. We never could take vacation trips, and migraine and asthma, and every time we tried to travel, she got sick. I never stopped loving her, but yes, regrets, all the trips we never took, all the things we could have done and were unable to. Hard to even have friends over for dinner. Some anger there for sure. Dr. Yalom, facing myself in this manner is not easy. I'm exhausted. How could you not be? You've just done some amazing work, and I'm honored you've trusted me so much, I said. Let's review what's happened in the last few minutes. At first, when you posited that you had no significant regrets, I couldn't help feeling that there was a darkened room in the house of your mind that you avoided entering. And then, when you did open it and turned on the lights, regrets poured out about your father's destructive influence on you and your brothers. And then you spoke of your son and your wife and her illness and all the experiences you and she never had. Yes, I wasn't really aware that was all there. Surprising. And I feel a little guilty admitting these things. Well, this is important, Albert. Let me emphasize that having regrets, even many regrets, even anger about the life you and your wife have lived, is not incompatible with loving her and loving her deeply. The same with your son. Both things can be true. I'm shivering as you say that. I wish we could continue to meet and explore that last idea. Oh, Albert, I'd love to. I just don't have the memory or the stamina. But remember, you are human and can hold contradictions. And just as you felt that shiver, I urge you to investigate these thoughts, ideally with one of the therapists I'll refer you to. Cure all of your anxiety about death, but it's certainly where I would start exploring. And it may help you see where you want to put your energies in your life now. With Albert looking surprised and exhausted, we wished each other well and said goodbye. As I clicked end meeting and my screen darkened, I reviewed our session in my mind. I was pleased. I had been helpful. Of that I had no doubt. I'd shared my own inner thoughts with him, my thoughts on religion and my memory of my father, as well as my relief at joining Marilyn. I believe the observations about religion had cemented a bond between us as fellow skeptics, building a certain intellectual alliance, and opening up about joining Marilyn and my own ambivalence towards the comforting con game of religious belief revealed my own vulnerability and likely helped build an emotional bridge between us. This seemed like another successful use of explicit, intentional self-disclosure in therapy. Every time I had offered some bit of my inner world in a consultation, it had helped my patient open up and quickly brought the two of us closer. But I have my limits, and there are some things I am not sharing. What I did not tell Albert was that earlier in the day, my daughter set off for a 30-minute walk to the cemetery to visit my wife's burial site. As always, she invited me to join her, and, as always, I declined. Marilyn died a year before, but I still hadn't visited her grave, not once. Whenever I thought of her or saw a picture of her, I continued to feel a stab in the heart. Was that why I declined? Or was it because I chose not to see the empty plot next to her, the plot where I will soon be buried? I really don't know. I do think a lot about dying these days, but I rarely find myself overwhelmed by fear or anxiety. It's more a presence that shows up, insists on sticking around and conversing, and then fades away. My willingness to sit with this presence despite the discomfort, to accept the inevitability of death, and to look at it squarely over the years is, I'm certain, an important reason why I no longer find it terrifying.
Amazing. Quite amazing. Ben, you are a natural. You're so good. Absolutely amazing. I think you do your father even better than he does himself. Are you there, Irv?
That was wonderful, Ben. Wonderful.
That was wonderful. Yes. Irv, what did you think of that?
That was a really good story. Whoa, did I do that? Did I write that?
Well, you wrote some of it and I wrote some of it, and we worked on it together.
That was just absolutely wonderful. Also deeply, deeply personal. You do share so much of your own heart and your secrets with your readers. And when your son reads it out in public, that is hugely exposing and vulnerable, isn't it?
It is. It's amazing. He did such a good story. I felt so proud of him for reading that
Yeah.
way. Yeah, it moved me very much and made me aware of what what a really good story that was.
I think one of the things that our working together on the book allowed is that I could see points in the stories where my father must clearly have been having something going on internally, but it wasn't all spelled out necessarily. So I had the opportunity to speak with him about either about the stories or often about, well, what do you think about this aspect of your living now? And really get some of those ideas out. And then I suspect that sometimes it was easier for me to write that internal dialogue than it might have been for my father to be quite.
So did you write that internal dialogue and not you, Irv?
Well, it was a combination.
Okay.
I can't tell you which paragraph he wrote, which one I wrote. That we really did work on it together.
It blended.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. So that means you're also very, very close.
Well,
Yes.
I like to think so. I like to think so, sure.
To my son, very.
Right. So how do you feel about your son taking over your words and speaking them on your behalf?
I loved it. I loved it so much. Yeah. In fact, I've never appreciated the story as much as I do now.
Oh, that's good.
It's a kind of immortality, isn't it? When you can pass things on down the line.
Well, I guess so. I suspect so. Maybe the story will still be important, years from now.
Oh, your books will be read for many, many decades, if not centuries from now. I can assure you that. You have secured yourself a place in the hearts of many psychotherapists to come, not just the ones around now. It's enduring, and one way in which I know that for sure is that you're one of these rare people who wrote a book in 1980 which has never had a second edition and which is still going strong. By any publishing terms, that is longevity for a book, and that foretells what will happen to it later on.
I'm assuming you're speaking of existential psychotherapy.
I am indeed. I am
And
indeed. Yes.
one of the things that, Dad, you may not remember this at this point, but for many years there was the question of, are we going to do a second edition? Are you going to do a second edition of existential psychotherapy? And your response often was, well, I very much want to visit these concepts again, but I don't want to do another edition of that book. It's research. And this constant thinking about it, I believe, evolved maybe specifically into staring at the sun, but also permeated so many of your works throughout. It was much more important to you to look at using these ideas and seeing how they played out with patients and in philosophy than revisiting the textbook, because I think the textbook stands on its own. It doesn't need an edition.
No, don't ever do another edition of it, Ben.
I don't think I could do that one justice. So
I think that stands in its own right, and it will hold that place forever. So let's leave it as it is. Yeah. But it's so wonderful to have a new book, though. I don't think any of us were thinking that you would come up with another book, even about still doing therapy at this late stage in life. It's quite extraordinary. And of course, now we know that, much of this comes from Ben as well, who is also a psychotherapist by now, but who obviously also has acting talents, which are an interesting combination, to be honest.
Well, I spent.
I worshipped when I was a child. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and my parents had a little store, and it was living. We were living in Washington D.C. and it was a black neighborhood, and I had to walk about 8 blocks to go to the white school, and my parents would not let me play with any of the black children, and so I was very much alone. And I spent my childhood in the library, and I came home every time from the library with a big basket full of books, and I read all the time. And books were my friends all the time, and they were so important to me.
Your friends, right?
Yes, well, in some sense, the only ones you were allowed to have.
Right, that's right.
Can you remember what your favorite one was?
My favorite book?
Yeah,
No,
as a child, no?
that's a question. I can't. I read some.
My father has been a really prolific reader and set the model for me as a child. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to be nearly as prolific a reader as I grew up watching my father be. But I will say that uh, at any moment in time, probably until recently, as your eyes have made it hard for you to read, there was always at least three books in play at any given moment. One, usually a novel, and my father tended towards either big modern novels with sprawling characters and settings. Dickens is always a favorite,
Oh, yes.
or science fiction. I've been a big fan of science fiction and the philosophical questions that come up in science
Yeah,
fiction.
yeah.
Oh, and usually a book of something in a philosophic vein or something specifically related to whatever book project you were working on at the time. So when you were working on When Nietzsche Wept, for instance, learning all about Nietzsche and related things and learning all about Breuer and Freud in that time period. An inveterate reader and researcher.
Yes.
For a 94-year person, as I am, what Ben is saying is all new. And now I explain these things. Yes, it's true, but my memory has gone, and he's telling me things that now I remember. He's putting them back into my mind. It's a very experience for me to hear this.
Yes. So when Ben says it, you remember it. It comes back.
Coming back into my mind,
Yes.
but I'd forgotten them all.
Yeah.
Waiting for them to return to my mind.
Well, it's a good thing your children know these things then, isn't it? They
Yes,
can remind you. Yeah. Yeah.
I've always encouraged them to read.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, and you encouraged me also well, you certainly didn't encourage me to go into the theater. You brought up theater. I spent 20 years as a theater director prior to coming into
Yeah.
this. But you inadvertently encouraged me by taking me to the theater a great deal. And
Right.
it was a very daunting thought to follow in my father's footsteps into the world of psychiatry or
I
psychology. So I
bet.
fled. I went as far as I could in a different direction, maybe not so far really, but I became a theater director.
Yeah.
Really because of, in many ways, we went to the theater so much and it seemed so important to me. And it's turned out to be very good training for being a therapist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Most certainly. And it's very good to have another background, isn't it? So that you know a lot about the world. But can I ask though, did your father encourage you to turn away from the theater towards psychotherapy, or was that a shock to him? What did you think about that, Irv, when Ben decided to go in this direction and now is obviously going into your footsteps, the very footsteps you made?
It moves me so much. My eyes are full of tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
I,
is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
I will say that for many years, my father would say to me, well, you could just, if you would just go into counseling, you'd do very well. And
Did he?
my world in theater was quite successful, but certainly not financially successful. It was a very experimental theater. So I think that when I finally came around to deciding to make this transition, it was both probably a great relief financially, but also I think we both, I got great support from my father about my potential as a therapist, and I felt quite welcomed into the field by not only by him but by his friends and colleagues.
Wonderful. Well, I think you have a very bright career ahead of you, Ben, I should think.
We shall
I,
see.
I think so. He's still a young guy. He's good word.
So young still, Irv. All those years ahead of him. Think about all the books he can write about you when you're no longer there.
I'm just seeing some of the chat come up, and Ryan has written about the combination of creative and expressive arts therapies. I would just say to anyone who's interested in having a dialogue about that and how theater and arts and therapy intersect, please contact me. I would love that. But
Good.
enough about me. I know that
Well,
we're really here.
I'm sure that John would love to organize a session about that on online events as well, Ben.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. That would just be wonderful.